This video is sponsored by Normandy 1998, Christopher Mitchell, 212th Trooper, Silas 1610, and Ash. Hi everyone, this is a video I've been meaning to do for a while. Since way back in early 2022, when I was only 3 months into my journey as a content creator, I set myself the task of watching and ranking all, at the time, 26 Pokémon films, not counting Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, since it's more or less a shot-for-shot remake of the first movie, and thus would be redundant to talk about as any points made in its favour also apply to the original. Unfortunately, due to being a baby creator at the time, and also less familiar with the art of media critique, that video wasn't very good. However, I do believe that many of the points made, albeit somewhat clumsily, do still have merit, and so I've decided to sit down, bust out the red pen, and take another shot at creating my definitive ranking list of all 27 Pokémon movies. Though, before we get into the rankings, I do just want to say that this is all based on my subjective opinion, so if your favourite film is at the bottom of the list, that doesn't make it bad. It just means that I personally believe it either has some flaw that places it lower than other movies in the franchise, or when we reach the upper rankings, lacks something that makes those above it shine. But with that out of the way, the first entry on our list, in 27th place, is I Choose You. Rest assured, I know that this is a divisive way to start, since I Choose You has been a polarizing film since release, with some considering it a splendid tribute to mark 20 years of the franchise, while others believe it is either a cheap cash grab, or more generously, that it just fails to capture the magic of the original journey through Kanto. I personally fall into the latter camp, having never been a fan of the film, but before I get too heavily into criticism, I feel it's appropriate to acknowledge what I Choose You does well. Due to animation technology and the effort put into it, it looks beautiful throughout, and the portion recapping the first episode is a delightful nostalgia trip, especially as someone who grew up with the early anime. However, here is also where I believe its greatness weakness lies. This movie suffers for being shackled to the original series, which hampers its ability to tell a creative and new story, since each time it is not faithful in its adaptation, it stands out. But each time it tries to recreate something from the original series, it feels shoehorned, or like an inferior version. A prime example of this would be Team Rocket, who simply put a not needed in the film, as they add nothing to the plot and at times actively distract from it, but are included anyway because their absence would be frowned upon by longtime fans. Another example would be Cross. He has an interesting enough personality and motivation as the rival espousing strength above all, in contrast to Ash's friendship-based ideology, but due to the perceived need for our favourite spiky-haired hero to acquire an abandoned Charmander like in the main timeline, he is thrust into the Damien role, which invites unfavourable comparisons to both Damien himself and through his demeanour to fan-favourite rival Paul, neither of whom he could hope to compete with, due to the former being allowed to be cartoonishly hateable, while Cross has to at least be understandable, and the latter having the benefit of almost 4 real-world years of time to watch him develop and display complexities, something Cross cannot do in a 2-hour film. As a result, he winds up feeling lackluster as a rival, which is unfortunate considering he is so integral to the plot, and especially the ending of the movie, which is also where my biggest issue with I Choose You resides. It is, to put it bluntly, nonsensical, as following Ash and Cross's final battle and Ash's victory, Cross attempts to steal the MacGuffin of the film, the Rainbow Wing, with his impure heart subsequently turning the film's mascot Pokemon Marshadow evil. Evil Marshadow then proceeds to summon a horde of corrupted Pokemon who attack and kill Ash. But don't worry, since this somehow gives Pikachu the power of human speech, which the electric rodent uses to call out to Ash, thus allowing him to outrun being dead, apparently. Frankly, I don't understand any of the logic behind this climax, both in-universe and out of it, since in the movie, no explanation is given beyond friendship, while in our world, it just seems like terrible marketing to make your supposed benevolent movie mascot execute the beloved face of the franchise, only to bring him back 2 minutes later. So let me get this straight. Marshadow is both a jerk and inept. Yeah, I definitely want to buy cards, toys, and t-shirts of that Pokemon. If someone could explain to me what the thinking behind this ending was, please do so in the comments below. But for now, I'm moving on to number 26, Jirachi Wishmaker. This is thankfully a choice that should provoke fewer pitchforks and torches, as it is often one of the most poorly regarded movies in the series, and for good reason, as it suffers from bad tonal whiplash, going from goofy carnival fun to world-ending threat in the blink of an eye, not to mention the big kaiju battle at the end just kind of happens with little to no build-up. To make matters worse, this fight is with a goo replica of Groudon, making the battle feel hollow, as though the writers were afraid to use the real deal for some reason. Perhaps they knew it would appear later in the anime, though that's never stopped them before. However, when push comes to shove, I believe the movie's biggest sin is that it's rather boring, since nothing from the character writing to the action gives a viewer much to invest in. Even the titular Jirachi barely has a personality in contrast to previous movie legendary Pokemon who will appear later in the list, making it an unappealing prospect to go back and watch again. As a result, I have no real vitriol towards this film, I just feel apathy, which is why it's so near the bottom. Following up from this, we have number 25, Giratina and the Sky Warrior, the second in the Sinnoh trilogy, and a film I thought would rank at number 14 before actually going back and rewatching it. However, after doing so, I had to drop it 11 places, with 9 of these being due to Shaman's annoyingness, while the final 2 were lost because of the villain and the plot. And it is here I feel we should discuss Pokémon movie plots. In general, there are only a few of these, with those being a person or Pokémon with malevolent intent wants to cause havoc so Ash must stop them, a MacGuffin has appeared and Ash must either acquire or transport it to save the world, and a cute legendary Pokémon needs help from Ash and co getting to an important place while being pursued by a menacing antagonist. This movie is the last of these archetypes, and by far the worst iteration of it. As previously mentioned, Shaman is annoying, bratty, and rude, significantly hurting its status as cute and endearing, while the movie's antagonist Zero is a cookie-cutter egomaniac, with unclear motivation for wanting to destroy the real world to protect the distortion world, since no time is given to his characterization beyond, "Wahaha, I am a bad man who is bad." In fact, if it weren't for Dawn's Piplup injecting some much-needed slapstick comedy into the movie to break up the monotony, it would probably rank below Jirachi Wishmaker. So thank you, little blue bird. You saved this film, or at least kept it from falling any lower. Now skipping over to Carlos to evenly distribute my dissatisfaction, we have number 24, Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. This film is exactly like Hoopa's rings, bright and shiny on the outside so you want to take a closer look, but inside it's entirely hollow. I will give this film praise for its premise, an ancient spirit, split between its playful good side and destructive evil half, who after the return of its evil half, must use its unique powers to summon forth legendary champions from across space and time to combat its evil side, who is doing the same in what will be, dare I say, a clash of ages. This has 1,001 fascinating routes that could be taken. Too bad the one they chose was a cameo free-for-all of every legendary Pokemon to date, with special focus being on the ones who play a significant role in the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire games, turning the whole thing into a very long and messy commercial for those games. But that same criticism could be leveled against several better films later on the list, so I'll let that slide for now, and instead focus on another glaring fault in this film. Hoopa, like Shaman before it, is frustrating to watch, as it is constantly getting up to incredibly unfunny mischief, often at the expense of others. While I recognise this is meant to be comedic, it just makes the little jerk unlikable, so much so that I'm shocked it hasn't been sealed away for being a menace with all its interdimensional shenanigans. But now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna alla Hoopa and away from this film as fast as I can. And on to our next pick, the 10th anniversary special and first of our TV movies. Number 23, Mastermind of Mirage Pokémon. Let's not mince words. This entry has one massive critical flaw that drags it down. Its antagonist, Dr. Jung, whose terrible plan is perhaps among the most self-defeating in cinema history. His objective is to acquire Professor Oak's research data so he can create unstoppable Mirage Pokémon and rule the world. Great. So far so good, but why go to the effort of creating the Mirage Master persona and kidnapping Oak when the Professor already called Jung his old friend at the beginning? By all accounts, he simply could have approached Oak and suggested they do a scientific collaboration to create Mirage Pokémon for the purpose of studying extinct or rare Pokémon, and Oak probably would have said yes. Then it would have been so easy to ask for access to his research data for the purpose of improving the Mirage Pokémon and making them more lifelike or some other excuse. But instead, Doofus over here decided to threaten the Professor and make him actively not want to help him. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, why did he invite Ash, Misty, and the others along? Their presence in no way benefits Jung's end goal, and only sets up obstacles for himself, since once they see Oak get kidnapped, they'll try to save him, and however unlikely it may seem, they might succeed, thus making them an unlikely risk for zero gain, since it's not like with Mewtwo where he wanted to copy their Pokemon. Instead, they are simply here because the plot demands it, with no attempt being made to justify it in-universe. But don't worry, since Dr. Jung isn't the only one to act irrationally and massively out of character, as following Jung's defeat, Ash and friends just let him walk back into his burning castle, meaning they stood by as he either committed suicide or escaped unpunished. Either way, that is not like our heroes at all. So, when you put a bad contrived plot, a bad titular character, and a bad representation of your established characters, well, you get a bad film, whose only redeeming feature is that Oak has a Dragonite and gets to battle for once, which is a neat novelty. However, even with this, I still shake my head in bewilderment and ask, who thought this was the best way to celebrate everything Pokemon has become over the last 10 years? Okay, thank you for bearing with me through some fairly savage reviews. We have now gotten through the real stinkers. From here on out, the films may still have issues, but they each also have at least something to redeem them, and I will try to balance out my praise and criticism. Starting off the lower end of the average films, we have number 22, Genesect and the Legend Awakened. a movie which, much like Hoopa and the Clash of Ages, had so much fascinating potential. Just for its premise alone it earns points with fans by bringing back the immensely popular Mewtwo, though admittedly not the one from previous movies, which feels like a missed opportunity considering the film is set in New Talk City, and that Mewtwo is last seen overlooking a city that looks remarkably like New York. But I digress. You still have Mewtwo coming into conflict with another artificial Pokemon created by a villainous team, which is an exciting idea by itself. The obvious parallels immediately lend themselves to rich character drama, as Mewtwo, who is more worldly and has learned to let go of its rage towards humans, must now help a group of Pokemon who are in a similar position to where it once was. And for the most part, this film delivers on that promise, with the final battle and resolution being Mewtwo taking the red Genesect into the atmosphere, so they can talk and come to understand each other. The issue is the rest of the movie before that. It feels largely unnecessary, with the unfortunate truth being that Ash and his friends are not needed at all due to it being Mewtwo and Genesect's story, and so their scenes generally feel like filler, albeit occasionally cute filler, like Ash riding on the timid Genesect. If this had been a Pikachu short, or even a special episode told from the perspective of someone observing Genesect's rampage, and Mewtwo resolving it through discussion after violence fails, this would have rated highly with me, but as it stands, it seems to meander its way to the important stuff for the sake of a feature length, and a chance to show off Mega Evolution despite having no explanation of how Mewtwo Mega Evolves without a Mega Stone, or what Mega Evolution even is, considering this takes place in Gen 5. And speaking of things that felt like they really didn't need to be feature length to advertise the thing they were meant to advertise, we have number 21, The Arceus Chronicles. Made in 2022 to promote Pokemon Legends Arceus, this is a compilation of 4 episodes that were released together as a TV movie outside Japan and Hong Kong. Unfortunately, the fact that this was not intended to be treated this way does show in its pacing, which feels very choppy, with the beginnings and end points of episodes standing out. Additionally, as far as fulfilling its purpose of showing off Legends Arceus, it doesn't really stick the landing, since while the first section of the first episode gives some time to a festival in honor of Sinnoh's past as Hisui, including showing off the outfits, starters, and Pokeballs from Legends Arceus, this is about all the game gets, as it quickly transitions into a story about Team Galactic wreaking havoc with a Heatran, neither of which have anything to do with the ancient past prequel. However, this is not to say it is all bad, as it does feature the return of Brock, now a fully fledged Pokemon doctor, with his Blissey having an impressive showing alongside Cynthia, though sadly, that could only get it this high in the rankings, when it fails at its purpose and doesn't really feel like a movie at all. The next few films all share similar gripes, so I'll try to speed run through them for the sake of this not being an hour-long video. First off, we have number 20, Zoroark Master of Illusions, which is a fairly dull film. Like Giratina and the Sky Warrior, it falls into the trope of cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash and Co getting to an important place while being pursued by a menacing antagonist, though the twist this time is the Pokemon isn't even legendary, it's instead a bit of Gen 5 promotion, and while I do honestly like the Zoro and Zoroark lines more than most Univern legendaries, this plot still feels a bit tired considering Giratina and the Sky Warrior was only 2 movies ago and set in the same generation. Speaking of generations, the thing this film undeniably does best is its Gen 5 promotion. Zoro and Zoroark as well-designed Pokemon are the perfect choice to try and replicate what Lucario did for Sinnoh, and the little allusions to Nimbasa City through the Baka team and Carlsbad having a Woobat silhouette on it are also really nice touches. Unfortunately, the whole Grings Kodai hunting down Celebi plot with the legendary beast coming in during the climax, while clearly advertisement for the latest games at the time being Heart Gold and Soul Silver, feels unnecessary and draws attention away from what the film's focus should be, a lost child alone in the world trying to make its way back to its mother, while that mother must continue to fight for her survival and freedom while under the thumb of an evil oligarch. Also, the fact that the villain's main weapon is misinformation through his control of the media and what people see makes this movie feel way ahead of its time. Following Zoroark, number 19, Destiny Deoxys is next on the list of not bad but fairly mediocre movies. The reason this film ranks higher than the previous entry is I have no specific complaints about it, I just find the vast majority of it boring. Points in its favour include the good use of Deoxys' forms and abilities, the cityscape is a fresh new battlefield, and Tori's whole journey from being afraid of Pokemon to regaining his love of them, but sadly, none of these elements are enough to inject that much-needed dose of heart, fun, or excitement which could have made this entry into an all-time great. Next up is number 18, Volcanion and the Mechanical Marvel, the last film in the main timeline and an ultimately inauspicious way to end almost 20 years of films. Points in its favour include that the movie looks nice, Azoth Kingdom is a neat steampunk setting, albeit a somewhat derivative one of Alamos Town, and the gimmick of Ash being bound to Volcanion allows for a bit of slapstick humour, but beyond that it really doesn't offer much. It isn't a bad movie, it's just that before this recent rewatch, the only thing I could remember from the whole film was the scene where Ash hugs a Pokemon and gets told off, since the last thing its trainer did before abandoning it was give it a hug. So that should tell you how effective it is at leaving a lasting impact. Rounding out the "it was just kinda dull" category is number 17, Kyurem vs. the Swords of Justice. This film has good ideas in theory, but falls short in execution. To summarize its premise, a cocky young apprentice accidentally causes his masters and friends to be frozen, then runs away in shame, only to be pursued by the one who froze them, prompting him to eventually own up to his mistakes, face his fears, and in doing so prove that he is worthy to be a full member of the team. This is pure gold with ties to the classic hero's journey, which inspired characters such as Luke Skywalker and Harry Potter. However, this film has one issue that those other ones don't. Keldeo sucks. I know part of the hero's journey is for them to start Kalos so they can become wise, but I just found him insufferable all the way through. I also don't like the Swords of Justice's Pokemon and never have, so that may be a point of bias that I have to acknowledge. On top of the middle portion being a slog as previously hinted at, I also didn't really care for how they handled Kyurem and its ability to transform into its white and black forms, giving little to no justification, and making it feel like an arbitrary addition for the sake of showing off the latest game's gimmick. Finally, its most egregious sin is that it hits all the same beats as a cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash and Co getting to an important place while being pursued by a menacing antagonist movie. You may at this point be wondering why that is so bad, and that's a valid question. The reason, my friends, that this aggravates me so is because this is the 7th film since that trope has been introduced, and of those 7, 4 have followed that plot. That is more than half, while also making up 37.5% of all Pokemon movies to that point. Now, I consider myself a patient person, but that is getting excessive, especially when there are so many more interesting formats a Pokemon movie can take. And let me tell you, if you're watching them all in close succession over a very short span of time, it's even more noticeable and infuriating. Though, credit where credit is due, it is one of the better instances of that trope, so we can all thank Arceus for the fact that at the very least they tried to hone that plotline with successive attempts. Moving on, we have an ambitious film that tried a lot of things, and for that I respect it. Or should I say, them. That's right, number 16 is Black Victini and Zekrom, and White Victini and Reshiram. Starting off with what makes this film stand out is that, as alluded to, it is two films which are largely identical, except for one version having Ash join forces with Reshiram the Dragon of Truth, while in the other he bonds with Zekrom the Dragon of Ideals. The opposite dragon is then partnered with the antagonist Damon, who I call an antagonist rather than a villain, because he never does anything truly evil. Instead, he chases a misguided dream with more zeal than sense, and upon realizing the error of his ways, works tirelessly to correct it. This whole setup with the hero and antagonist each bonding with dragons and dueling over their beliefs, before the antagonist recognizes his mistake and tries to make amends, is very reminiscent of End's story in the Black and White games, and I am of the belief that the whole purpose of these films is to play with the concepts that made those games' storylines so engaging, even to the point where there are two versions of the game where Damon summons a different dragon, just like how in the game's End summons a different dragon based on the version you play. Unfortunately, due to being a 92-minute film, and one aimed at younger audiences due to being part of the soft reboot seasons, these films couldn't explore the nuances fully, and it hurts them overall. Another concept that I like in theory is that Victini's storyline is a subversion of the cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash and Co getting to an important place while being pursued by a menacing antagonist trope, since in this case, Victini the cute Pokemon is actively trying to get away from the place, and the antagonist is quite reasonable. However, that's really all Victini is going for it. It's cute and kinda endearing. From a storytelling perspective, it diverts focus from the rich themes that could be explored more via Damon, and had it been replaced by a magic Valrock or some other kind of battery to make the castle fly, the film would be no worse off. Speaking of making things worse, what's worse than getting caught in a turf war between the god of space and the god of time? That's right, our next film is Rise of Darkrai, the 15th best Pokemon film, and the rightful 10th anniversary special for the anime. I'm looking at you, Mastermind of Mirage Pokemon. I have a lot of fondness for this film, since it is the first movie I remember pre-ordering, and I still have the Darkrai I had to beg my parents to schlep out to Target to get installed onto my DS manually, in the days before mystery gifts could be easily downloaded, a fact that makes me feel dreadfully old. However, on a rewatch, this film sadly did not quite live up to all my nostalgia. To its credit, the initial mystery of Darkrai's motive is engaging, and making a Dark-type good is a fresh turn that the film is all the better for. I simply wish that more time had been given to the witch hunt led by Pokemon's answer to Gaston, Baron Alberto, since the story of persecution, prejudice, and misunderstanding is where this film shines. But instead, once Darkrai is revealed as an ally, all attention turns to stopping Dialga and Palkia, and the film becomes significantly less interesting. From there, it's a bit of a slog towards the end, made a bit more disappointing by the fact that Darkrai is revived at the end, cheapening its sacrifice. But before moving on to the next movie, I think it's important to discuss Rise of Darkrai's music. It is one track that makes it stand out, and is still stuck in my head days later, and that is the remix of We Will Be Heroes. What? You thought I was talking about Erasion? Erasion is all well and good, but this remix takes one of my least favorite Pokemon opening themes and makes it sound like Who Let the Dogs Out, a feat which truly impresses me and cements its place here. Coming in at number 14, we have Netflix's own Secret of the Jungle. Is this film fun and charming? Yes. Does it tell the story of fathers and sons, which is one of my favorite narrative through lines? Also yes. Is it incredibly derivative? Categorically yes. This film, in short, is Tarzan meets The Jungle Book meets Pokemon. Admittedly, this doesn't make it a bad film by any stretch, but it does somewhat limit my enjoyment when a part of me is always thinking that the things it rips off did parts of the plot better. It also has a number of weird inconsistencies in its internal logic that at best constitute poor explanation within the film, and at worst are just lazy plot holes, such as how Coco is able to use the Zarude's signature move, and what this means for humans being able to use Pokemon moves moving forward. With that in mind, I would say it is still worth a watch, it's just not a very original or logically clear film. Though I suppose it does earn the silver medal for the AU films, and that's something it should be proud of. The lucky 13th place on our list goes to Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction. This is a short but sweet film that finally puts to bed the cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash & Co getting to an important place or being pursued by a menacing antagonist trope, and for that alone it deserves my gratitude. However, it has more going for it than just that. The cute Pokemon in question, Diancie, is the franchise's answer to a Disney princess, and giving a request to save her people by finding Xerneas to increase her power feels like a natural way to both push the narrative forward and give Ash and friends a reason to be involved. My biggest issue with this film is its third act. At the end of the second act, Diancie completes her quest and is ready to save the day, but then because this film has been fairly lighthearted, a bunch of contrivances around stepping in a lake too many times awakens a Voltile, who promptly murders half the cast, including Pikachu, before just kind of going away for reasons. Then, before we can get any sense of consequence, Xerneas comes back and fixes everything, because it's the nice one, I guess. Then it also abruptly leaves. This results in a rather unsatisfactory conclusion and a sense of, oh, I guess the movie's over now, rather than feeling like a natural endpoint set up from the start, with this dragging it down the rankings a bit. As if it had just been able to stick the landing, I'm confident it could have found a spot in the top 10. Speaking of films that barely missed the top 10, next up is number 12, Detective Pikachu, and I think we all know why this is here. 1, because it brings Pokemon into live action in a way that had previously only been dreamed about, and 2, because Ryan Reynolds carries the comedy aspect of this movie impeccably. There really isn't much more to say about Detective Pikachu, since it's a fun romp with a rather obvious conclusion that precludes it from being called a real mystery, but all the same, I enjoyed it, and I really hope we get more live action Pokemon content in the future. Coming in as the lowest ranked Johto film, but still in the top half, we have number 11, The Legend of Thunder. Similarly to the Arceus Chronicles, this television movie makes up the 3-part pilot for the Pokemon Chronicles series, and it's not hard to see why. From the get-go, it is economical with its time, quickly establishing its cast of characters with enough personality on display to make them distinct, and with the exception of Vincent, endearing. This time, instead of Ash and his friends, we have Jimmy, a passionate young battler based on the male protagonist from the Gold and Silver games, and Marina, an aspiring performer based on the female protagonist from Crystal. With them are their friends Vincent and Eugene, who joined forces to defy a new Team Rocket duo, Attila and Hun, and protect the legendary Raikou. And it is here we see something else I quite enjoy about this film, the sense of mystery and majesty afforded to Raikou as one of the legendary beasts. Very little is freely given about this Pokemon early on, and each piece of information about its personality and motives is figured out by the characters as the movie progresses. Additionally, it strikes a good balance in how it handles the Thunder Pokemon's strength, being shown to be powerful enough to deserve the reverence it is given, while also not being so powerful that all sense of danger and tension are lost. This is done by showing that Raikou is unrivaled in raw power, but is vulnerable to human ingenuity like strategy and technology, due to being fairly isolated from the modern world, therefore falling to the good human characters to make up for what Raikou lacks, giving them a reason to be present, while it in turn compensates for what they lack. Another point in this movie's favour, surprisingly enough, is its brevity. For one reason or another, many Pokemon films tend to feel bloated, with the runtime being padded to qualify as feature length, though by virtue of being a TV movie, this film does not have that constraint, instead has to cram as much possible into a limited time frame, something I feel it succeeds in. I have already spoken about the efficient introduction of the characters, but this brisk pace keeps up throughout the film, with it serving as a nice contrast to the Arceus Chronicles, in that no scene is wasted, and everything shown on screen either builds the characters or furthers the plot. The only downside to this is there's only enough time for each trainer to have one or two established Pokemon, so that does somewhat limit the battles, and deprive us of a chance to see the full teams of our heroes, which might have given love to Johto Pokemon not owned by Ash and his friends. But even with that minor shortcoming, this film still manages to stand strong amongst its feature-length counterparts. As a frequently forgotten entry into the franchise, it is one I suggest checking out if you're able. Walking into the theaters for the next film, I didn't hold out much hope, but our number 10 spot, The Power of Us, is a charming film that delivers everything I Choose You couldn't, and proves that a reboot timeline can work. This film is a unique standalone story set in a brand new town following Ash, Pikachu and a cast of new characters. I won't deny that some of these new faces feel a bit half-baked to me, but one man stands out among the crowd, and his name is Callahan. Callahan is a braggadocio blowhard who, due to deep-seated feelings of worthlessness, tells exaggerated tales of his own heroism to win the respect and admiration of his niece Kelly, kinda like Pokemon's answer to Usopp. However, this quickly catches up with him when the truth of his lying and cheating comes out, and after hitting his lowest ebb where it seems like he will lose Kelly forever, he rises from the ashes, and works with the rest of the protagonists to serve an unselfish purpose for once, and in doing so, he becomes the hero he always said he was in the process. There's a beautiful example of the hero's journey alluded to in the Keldeo entry, and one of the most heartwarming stories I think has ever been in a Pokemon movie. My only regret is that by having a whole herd of human protagonists, Callahan gets less screen time than he deserves, which is all of it. Oh, and also it looks like Reboot Ash abandoned Charizard somewhere, since it never shows up or gets referenced, despite there being several key moments during this film where it would have been incredibly useful. Following this, we have the originator of the cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash and Co getting to an important place while being pursued by a menacing antagonist trope, and undeniably its best iteration. Number 9. Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea. This is one of the longest films in the franchise, yet passes by in the blink of an eye, thanks to the two titular elements of this film, which inspire a sense of fun and adventure. The usage of the Temple of the Sea as a catalyst for the story is a fun narrative choice, with it being teased and hinted at through dialogue and visions in a way that makes the audience curious to see it, before it is finally paid off at the end of the high seas adventure. This is another of the movie's strengths, placing our familiar cast of characters in the new setting of an aquatic hunt for sunken treasure, which is a refreshing change of pace that gives the film a sense of freshness. The other big appeal of this film is Jack Walker, the aforementioned Pokemon Ranger. His charming action hero persona, mixed with an affable soft side, makes him an enjoyable addition to the roster, and when coupled with his unique gimmick of using a capture style to gain help from a wide array of Pokemon who use their abilities to assist him in more than just battle, he becomes an excellent advertisement for the DS game of the same name. And at its core, that is what this whole film is, tying in closely with the first Pokemon Ranger game for the DS. Though, as far as nearly 2-hour-long commercials go, this is one of the best, as clear effort has been put into cherry-picking the most interesting elements of the game and putting them front and center to capture the imagination of prospective players. Best among those elements is Manaphy. While only an egg in the games, its bond with May carries the heart of this film, and is a delight to witness as the small water type comes to learn about the world it inhabits, with May playing the unfamiliar role of its mother. My only gripe with this film lies in its somewhat stupidly named villain, the Phantom. Due to his pirate aesthetic, it feels like a missed opportunity not to have him be a former member of Team Aqua, or else use him to promote the game's villainous team by making him a member of the Go Rock squad. However, when my biggest complaint is something so small, you know this film is good. And best of all, it achieves exactly what it intends to, by making me want to bust out my DS and play the Pokemon Ranger series all over again. Next up, we have number 8, Arceus and the Jewel of Life. Let me begin by saying this is a film that I did not expect to rank so high. As a child, I found it boring, until I Choose You came along. It was my least favorite Pokemon film by a significant margin. However, with age, and perhaps the benefit of Giratina and the Sky Warrior setting my expectations so low, I was able to find a lot to enjoy in this film, the simplest of those being that this movie is fun. fun. The time travel caper is well done and interesting. Team Rocket feel well used, which is rare in Pokemon films, as anchor characters to the calamity in the present, while also creating dramatic irony by mirroring Ash and Co in the past but misinterpreting what they find. And the new characters like Sheena, Deimos, and even that old nameless guard feel like valuable additions to the team, rather than unavoidable tag-alongs that must be endured until they can finally leave at the end of the film. Furthermore, this film thrives in its continuity, justifying the events of the previous films in its trilogy, Rise of Darkrai and Giratina and the Sky Warrior, in a way that makes everything seem to make sense and feel like it was building to this. And by this, I mean an earth-shattering clash between Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, and Arceus, in which they all feel deserving of their status as elder gods of the Pokemon world. Take note, Hoopa, this is how you do a clash of ages. Pokemon Forever, aka Celebi the Voice of the Forest, is next, and sadly it doesn't quite net 4th place, instead coming 7th, but it is a great film nonetheless. This charming movie puts a lot more emphasis on sweet character moments, mostly involving Ash, Celebi, and his new friend Sammy, who in a masterful twist is a young Professor Oak from 40 years in the past, though this movie does not lack for action either, with the sinister Iron Mask Marauder always close on our hero's heels. In case you're wondering why this doesn't constitute a cute legendary Pokemon needs help from Ash and Co getting to an important place or being pursued by a menacing antagonist movie, since it's the first time Ash and friends have met a cute legendary Pokemon, I would argue they aren't really trying to take Celebi anywhere, and are instead just enjoying a lovely day in the forest with their friends. Though, that is just my opinion, just like everything on this list. So if you feel this deserves the title of originator for this trope, then that is a perfectly valid interpretation. However, back to our hero's lovely day in the forest, it is all brought to a halt when the Iron Mask Marauder does something seldom seen in a Pokemon movie, and actually manages to capture Celebi in one of his Dark Balls, turning it evil, much like Marshadow in I Choose You, except instead of illogical and confusing, this is gut-wrenching. Now evil, Celebi proceeds to wreak havoc at the center of a giant CGI Twigmech, which probably looked great back when I was a kid, but is a little obtrusive during the scenes where Ash and Sammy as hand-drawn characters are placed inside the early 2000s computer animated setting. But thankfully, the mech doesn't last long, as Ash and Sammy's friendship with Celebi allows it to break free of the Marauder's control and stop destroying the forest it loves. But the effort of doing so costs Celebi its life, and in another rarity for Pokemon movies, the cast all openly discuss Celebi's death. No leave this world or be destroyed euphemisms this time. They say die like 4 times in one scene, and it makes their pain feel more real. It also makes the joyful scene that follows more palpable when all the Celebes from across time come to revive their fallen friend. Backed by a haunting vocal track with minimal instrumentation that goes from mournful to triumphant, this scene is a thing of beauty that has stuck in my mind for over 20 years, and is why it deserves its place in the top 10. And before we move on, just a little Easter egg for Zoroark Master of Illusions that helped boost its ranking, but I didn't want to talk about then since it ties close to this movie. Whenever Celebi is on screen in that movie, a happy choir version of Celebi's revival theme is playing in the background. It's a lovely little bit of continuity that came from this film, and suggests that I am not the only one with a soft spot for Celebi, voice of the forest. But just as how at the end of the film Sammy must say goodbye to Ash, we must now say goodbye to this movie. Though goodbyes need not be sad, since we will now be moving on to an even better film, our 6th place winner, The Power of One. Not to be mistaken with Power of Us, though both have ties to Lugia, this is the 2nd film in the franchise, in which Ash must complete the Shamudi prophecy and help the Guardian of the Waters calm the legendary birds. And why did this film rank so high? It's pretty damn funny. Gags are crammed in left and right, with many of them being subtly aimed at a more adult audience. I suppose being in the same sort of vintage as Shrek, this may have been the style of comedy in family films at the time, but either way, it feels like a level of added care to appeal to all ages which I appreciate as someone who has had Pokemon be a part of my life at every stage. But laughs aren't the only thing this film does right. It has beautiful classic visuals, exciting moments both in and out of battle, and heartfelt moments between Ash and our other established characters like Misty, Delia, and I'll talk more about why this is good later, and most shockingly of all, Team Rocket. Team Rocket kinda carry this film in one of their best usages, being both hilarious as previously stated, but also in a delightful face turn, joining forces with Ash during the climax, and then willingly sacrificing themselves for the greater good. Though Ash is the chosen one who gets the win at the end, Team Rocket are the true heroes of this movie, and I love that enough thought was given to grant them this honor rather than just forcing them in then promptly shelving them. And I would be remiss not to mention the soundtrack. Lugia's song remains iconic to this day, featuring both in-universe and out. Its simplicity is evocative of the sea and how it can be both smooth and turbulent, and I cannot imagine a better piece of music to represent this majestic creature. In fact, I would go so far as to call it the third greatest piece of music in a Pokemon film. If you want to know what the other two are, stay tuned as we move into the top 5. I love every movie in the top 5, and to my mind, each of them does something perfectly. For example, the perfect portrayal of pathos can be found in number 5, Spell of the Unknown, Entei. The source of this pathos actually centers around the film's antagonist, Molly Hale. Molly is perhaps the most fascinating idea for an antagonist Pokemon has had to date. She is simply a lonely child who has lost her parents and wants to be loved. In the simple and often self-centered mindset of a child, she allows the unknown to fulfill this desire by creating a dream world for her with an Entei father, who then kidnaps Ash's mother Delia to serve as her new mum. Due to being a child, Molly cannot see the harm she is causing to others, the world around her, and even herself, as she warps reality and sinks further into her dreams. So I suppose the Black and White games were right when they said, there is nothing more beautiful and terrifying than innocence. This film also has a delightful depth to its psychology, with Molly's dream world being the manifestation of her unfiltered id. For those unfamiliar, the id is the part of the subconscious linked to desires and impulses, and in most people, the ego and superego are used to regulate the id. However, the unknown only seem to manifest Molly's id, and so it takes Ash and friends who act as the realistic ego, and Delia who takes the role of the moralistic superego, to guide Molly back to a healthier mindset. I love this resolution, since it allows our main cast to flourish and show some depth rather than solve every problem through fighting or yelling. And best of all, Delia gets plenty of spotlight, showing a compassionate side, as well as her inner strength in a way that makes her more than just a 2D shonen mum archetype, a glow-up that she well deserves as a character who has been around as long as Ash yet is often overlooked. This film is a feast for your heart and your mind, and a must-watch for any Pokemon movie marathon. But maybe Freudian psychology isn't what you want in your Pokemon films. If so, can I offer you some fun instead? And if you want fun, look no further than number 4, Pokemon Heroes. This film is enjoyable from the get-go, quite literally, as it opens with a water chariot race through beautifully drawn canals, with Ash and Misty at the head of it, while a full-length version of Season 5's awesome opening theme, Believe in Me, shreds underneath. From there we get to enjoy some low-stakes exploration of the lovingly designed Alto Mare, but before it can start to drag, the real story kicks in, introducing us to Latias and Latios, as well as their human friend Bianca. Note, not the Black and White rival. As it turns out, they all share a secret garden that houses the Soul Dew, which is the crystallized soul of Latias and Latios' father that protects Alto Mare. However, this all comes crashing down when the Soul Dew is stolen and Latios is captured. Once more, this film does a flawless and natural-feeling tone shift into an action rescue story, as Ash and Latias work to save Latios. But even when they succeed, all is not well, and to save Alto Mare from impending disaster, Latios must give his life to become the new Soul Dew. This film runs the gamut of joy to sorrow, but always maintains a difficult balance where it never feels rushed or tonally inconsistent, yet also never overstays its welcome with any of its set pieces. This broader range of emotional states is what puts it over Spell of the Unknown, though I will admit these two were some of the hardest rankings since I love them both so much. However, there was one decision that was even harder to make, and that is determining the order of these final 3 films, since I adore each of them with my whole heart. I also noticed that each of them had a few commonalities that set them apart from the rest, and if you don't mind, I'd like to discuss them before we get into the 3, 2, 1. The first common trait all 3 of these movies have is a perfect balance of action, heart, and fun. Other films like Spell of the Unknown might nail heart, while Heroes handles the fun aspect flawlessly, but only these 3 in my opinion perfectly balance them all. The next thing they do flawlessly is explore the notion of a true hero as one who does what is right because it is right, and because it serves more than just themselves. None of these heroes act in the name of personal gain, and in fact many of them perform their heroism at great personal cost, which only makes them more admirable. Credit where credit is due, Darkrai and Rise of Darkrai and Latios and Pokemon Heroes also fit into this category. However, what keeps their films out of the top 3 is the lack of that perfect balance and other gripes listed in their reviews. And now with that out of the way, I am proud to announce our bronze medalist film as Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. Generation 4 could not have asked for a better representative than Lucario. Its incredible design has made it a fan favourite since day one, and the cool personality mixed with the heartfelt backstory as shown in this film instantly makes it stand out. Starting as a gruff fish out of water who has been betrayed by its master, the legendary hero Sir Aaron, Lucario steadily develops throughout the film via the use of flashbacks that allow the audience to go on a journey with this Pokemon as it learns to trust again and forms a touching friendship with Ash. This also allows for excellent layering of already established scenes to add details and complexities, which all lead up to the final revelation of its master's true motives and actions. And it is here where Lucario shows off its status as a hero. Having learned that Sir Aaron gave his life to the Tree of Beginning to prevent the needless death of others, Lucario chooses to make the same sacrifice so the tree and all who dwell within it may live. In doing so, it proves that it is exactly like its idol, both through its sacrifice and the fact that it chooses to shoulder this cost when it would be easier to allow another to die in its place, and in doing so saves its friend Ash from suffering Aaron's fate. Lucario's death scene is utterly perfect, from the visuals to the acting to the musical score, which I would say is the second best piece to appear in a Pokémon movie. And I am not ashamed to admit that on most viewings, it elicits some tears from me. And then, as the piece de resistance, it finds a way to turn tragedy into joy, by showing that though Lucario is gone, its aura lives on through Ash, and its spirit is at last reunited with Sir Aaron. But at this point, you may be asking why this film is only third place if I love it so much. Simply put, it has one scene that drags on a little. Yes, that's it. In a contest of 3 near-perfect films, I have had to get down to this level of nitpicking. In this case, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew's Pokemon party in the attic takes a bit long to get to the point of the Weavile attack, and during that time, it is providing neither heart nor action, with the intended fun element feeling a bit forced rather than actually being fun. That said, this film still has my highest recommendations, and deserves a viewing, if for no other reason than a chance to enjoy its final scene. After Bronze comes Silver, and so it's time to talk about the penultimate film on our list, and in this case, number 2 is the TV movie Mewtwo Returns. As the first instance of digital ink and colouring in a Pokemon movie, this film's visuals pop with colour and crisp lines that make it stand out from the crowd, but even the beautiful visuals do not hold a candle to the film's greatest strength, being its use of plot and character. As the sequel to the first movie, it reunites us with Mewtwo and his clone Pokemon, while they try to grapple with their place in the world. Mewtwo is particularly torn between his desire to give his friends their freedom, knowing firsthand what it is like to be caged, and keeping them safe, since he is equally aware of the cruelty of humans. This creates a rich sense of pathos where neither side is ever shown to be right or wrong, in a surprisingly nuanced manner that makes audiences consider their own stance on Mewtwo's dilemma. However, before this philosophical debate can grow stale, the most menacing threat in any Pokemon movie enters the picture, and it is none other than the Team Rocket boss Giovanni, hell-bent on retrieving what he considers his property. This forces the two leaders into a clash of wills where the future of all Pokemon born or cloned hangs in the balance. And this is where Mewtwo's heroism comes to the fore, when Giovanni realizes that he cannot defeat Mewtwo through force of will or raw power, and so proceeds to force the clone's hand by threatening to perform unspeakable experiments on his clone friends unless Mewtwo submits to physical torture, which will either kill him or bend him to Giovanni's will. Being a noble leader, Mewtwo submits for the sake of the others, but even still does not allow his will to be broken, choosing to fight and die rather than serve Giovanni's evil purposes again. And die he nearly does, being mortally wounded in his escape from the torture machines. But thankfully, his life is saved by Ash, who has spent this movie trying to find and rescue Pikachu after a kidnapping by Team Rocket gone awry. And this plotline is another point to the film's credit, as much of the comedy can be found here thanks to Team Rocket, as well as a fascinating characterization of Ash that is rarely seen, where he is serious in demeanor, single-minded in his determination to find his best friend, and will go to any length to achieve this goal. This is the path that leads Ash to Mewtwo, and for the second time, he opens the Psychic type's eyes to a flaw in its logic, and in doing so clears away the last shadows of the past clouding Mewtwo's heart, thus allowing him to finally be at peace. At this point, the film is nearly at its end, but still has time to deliver a thrilling climax, in which a now actualized Mewtwo is able to use the full force of his will to drive Giovanni and his cronies from the clone's sanctuary, and ensure that he will never trouble them again. It is a gripping finish wrapping up with a touching final scene, in which Mewtwo learns from his past mistakes, and allows those with good intentions to keep their memories of him, before heading out into the world to protect those who still need his protection. And speaking of memories of Mewtwo, I suspect it must be pretty obvious which movie will be receiving the top spot on this list, and I will admit that perhaps it is an obvious choice, but sometimes things are obvious because they are true. And one thing that I believe is true is that the best Pokemon film is also the first one, Mewtwo Strikes Back. Mewtwo Strikes Back is the film that proved that Pokemon has a place on the big screen, and the movie to which all subsequent films in the franchise pay homage. It weaves heart, action, and fun throughout its run, to the point where every scene is brimming with at least one of these traits, and on top of that, it adds a genuine sense of menace. Just as Mewtwo is a complex hero in the sequel, in the original he is a deep villain who relatably seeks purpose, but has been emotionally scarred by human cruelty, to the point where he has closed his heart and become just as cruel as those who hurt him. Believing the only world where clones can be safe is a world where only they exist, he plots to wipe humans and natural-born Pokemon from the face of the earth, but at every turn, his ideology is challenged by that of Ash and his friends, who exhibit a philosophy of kindness, friendship, and cooperation. This all comes to a head when war breaks out between the clones and the originals, with Mewtwo facing off against the Mew from whom he was cloned in a lethal duel. Though, amidst the carnage, Meowth of all characters shares the first of the film's brilliant moral lessons, when he says, "We do have a lot in common. The same earth, the same air, the same sky. Maybe if we started looking at what's the same instead of what's different. Well, who knows?" This is one of the truly wonderful parts of this film. It speaks to a deeply human message of unity and understanding, something people have struggled with since the beginning of time, yet is summed up so simply here that even a child can understand it. Though, unfortunately, this quote isn't left to hang long, since Mew and Mewtwo's battle has escalated, and all around them it appears that the battling Pokemon are on the verge of death. Refusing to allow this to happen, Ash runs between Mew and Mewtwo's incoming blasts, and gives his life in the name of peace. Almost 30 years on, and this is still Ash Ketchum's greatest character moment, in which he proves himself a true hero. In that moment, he knows that he lacks the power to force these behemoths to halt their fight, so he uses the only thing he has, the strength of his convictions, to make them see what they are doing. Now, I don't believe this means he knew he would die and so intentionally became a martyr. Rather, he put himself directly in the center between the respective champions so they could do no harm to each other, showing he wanted to protect both the clone and the original. What follows is a scene every Pokemon fan knows. Ash's body turned to stone while Pikachu tries desperately to rouse his best friend, all to no avail. Tears then begin to fall from the Pokemon, their clones, and the humans assembled, as the movie series' best musical track, the evocative and moving Tears of Life, plays. And through these tears, Ash is revived, finally opening Mewtwo's heart and quelling his rage, as he realizes what this human was willing to sacrifice. And here we get our other lesson, directly from the mouth of Mewtwo. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. What better final message is there for a film that preaches love and acceptance? A perfect film, wrapped in a perfect bow. And I could go on, doing a full retrospective of everything this film does right. But by now you're probably all sick of listening to me. So I'll wrap this up by saying thank you so much for going on this journey with me. If you disagree with my rankings, feel free to comment yours down below, and I will see you as the journey continues.